potential benefits of moving to the cloud?
I think that there's many, many benefits. The one that gets most people interested is reduced cost. And reduced costs can come through some of the things we spoke about sort of at a high level earlier, which is that idea of economies of scale. There's probably 20 to 30% reduction in costs by moving certain workloads into the cloud. In those cases, you might spend a little bit more money with Microsoft, but save a heck of a pile of labor on your own end. But mostly it's just cost that gets cut out. That instead of you having to incur the cost, it just gets shifted someplace else. So it's not a labor reduction on maybe 10 workloads. There is a lot of benefits to being able to scale for the computing power that you have to be elastic, to grow and shrink with what your need is. Most businesses have a very high fixed cost footprint, and most businesses stay awake at night or get out of bed early in the morning to try and figure out how they can have less of a fixed cost footprint and more of a variable one. So this is a good way to do that. I think that there's a amount of risk that's being shifted around. So again, it's got to do with that capital outlay versus a operating dollar outlay, where in the world 10 years ago, if you were going to buy a new system, whatever that might be, and let's say the price tag on that new system was $1 million, you spent a lot of time thinking about it. You probably waited 2 or 3 years longer than you should have to pull the trigger. And then when you put it in place, you as the customer were taking all of the risk of it actually working or not. And if you think about the world today, in terms of this idea of variable costs, where I can actually buy a user for $100, if I wanted to buy 5 users for $100 a month at $500 a month over the course of 6 months, for $3,000 I can try something. So I don't have to wait for 3 years to pull the trigger, and I can just kind of try it, and if it works great, I do more, but if it doesn't work, I don't. So I think those are some of the really big things that are changing it. The one thing on that list that maybe is a little bit a sleeper is mobile. So when you think about the cloud and things that you can do with this technology that you couldn't do before, a lot of it is enabling mobile and allowing you to do more and more things on your phone, and not having to have a computer, not having to be at the office, not having to be at home, not having to connect via VPN into the network. And that's really powerful. It's powerful in that the tools now are being created so that when you have, say, visualizations, maybe in the form of BI, so Power BI is an example, those things render to the size of screen that you have. So if you have a very small screen, they render in a way that you can look at it and use it. If you are using your tablet, they render to that size. If you have sort of a large screen, it renders to that size. And if you think about sort of the doors that unlocks, the things it allows you to do differently, it can be a really big deal. And it can allow you to take assets that you have in your organization. And if you think about what a business does, it sort of organizes whatever assets it has into a format where their customers can consume it. But if you think about this sort of digital world, and back to that slide of the Vatican, and that idea that every one of your customers, every one of your colleagues has a phone, or not everyone, but most of them have a smartphone, all of a sudden you can do a bunch of things that you couldn't do before. And that could be very, very helpful, I guess, in unlocking the business potential that you have. So an example might be Airbnb. If you think about Airbnb, probably everybody knows who that is, but they started selling people sofas to sleep on, and then eventually rooms and houses, and eventually, could be an apartment, could be a house, could be whatever it was, a boat. What's interesting is that those beds always existed, just nobody could get access to the inventory, and they created a way in which people could do that. If you think about that in the context of your own business, there's all kinds of interesting things that concept of mobile opens up.
Great, thanks, Brent. I'm curious, is the cloud right for every company?
Yeah, no. No, it's really not. But it's right for a lot of companies. And, where it's really wrong is if you have bad communications to the cloud. So if you live in Yellowknife, you're going to have a difficult time with cloud-based services. It would work for email and things like that. But ultimately, for a lot of the workloads, they wouldn't be suitable to the cloud just because your communication speed has too much latency built into it. I'd say that, if we look at our customer base, less than 5% of them have everything that they do in the cloud. And I'd say that less than 5% of them have nothing that they do in the cloud. So everybody's sort of in the middle, or most of the people are in the middle, and trying to figure out what makes the most sense for them so they can really take advantage of the technology. There's certain points in time where this comes up. You know, should I be more in the cloud? Should I be less in the cloud? And I think that the two main drivers of that would be most businesses do a strategic planning exercise of some kind. Often it's sort of looked at on an annual basis, whether it's totally retooled or not is probably not the case, but every 3 years or so it gets totally retooled in most businesses. And they're looking at what they're trying to do over the next 3 years. And a lot of times a part of that plan is how is technology going to support that? And that's a really good time to look at, hey, how might the cloud be a way that we're not thinking about that could really enable us to do more than we could otherwise? And the second time is if you're ever doing an upgrade. So let's say that you're on a previous version of Dynamics and you want to upgrade to the newest version. That would be a great time, again, back to what you had asked me earlier. We're going to buy a server. Why am I doing that? It's time to kind of rethink that and really look at what I want to do.
Great. Do I have to move all my business applications to the cloud?
Definitely not. So you can move some. I think that's probably the easiest. There's certainly some that have a sweet spot. So email is one that I'd be very surprised if many people had a reason why they wanted to have email on site. Disaster recovery is another one. File storage is another one. There's certain ones that really are a sweet spot to be in the cloud that save it for everybody money. So those would be easy ones to justify or move. I say when you get into CRM, probably 75% of clients are in the cloud. If you're not in the cloud, again, usually it's because you have a specific reason why you can't be, but it makes a tremendous amount of sense for that particular application to be there. When it comes to ERP, what probably is going to drive you there is that next time you got to replace a server. Yeah.
Great. Our customers are wondering if they still have control of their data if it's in the cloud.
So yes, you do. You can basically do with it as you wish. I want to be a little careful about that because, of course, when you stop paying for it, that's when you can no longer have control of your data. So you want to be careful about when you're transitioning things out of the cloud. If you're using things like Microsoft Azure, you actually can hibernate it. So by virtue of you putting it into hibernation, you stop paying, but your data is still there for whenever you want to come back and get it. If you have something like Office, and each user in Office has a terabyte of data storage space for file storage and such, if you were to stop paying for Office, after a certain amount of time, that data would disappear unless you moved it someplace else. So the trick is you have complete control, but as you're changing what you're paying for, you want to make sure that you are thinking about where those assets are.
So Brent, what happens to my internal IT resources if I do migrate to the cloud?
They get to go on vacation occasionally. They get to enjoy summers for the first time in their work lives. They might even get a couple of days off at Christmas, which would be nice. I am an IT guy, can you tell? Yeah. So I think there's a lot of benefits to the IT resources, and it's interesting because when we talk to people about the cloud 3-4 years ago, a lot of times it was the IT group that was blocking that discussion. They had all kinds of reasons why this couldn't work or shouldn't work. That really isn't the case anymore. It happens occasionally, but not very often. I think when you look at your IT team, they always have more stuff to do than there is time in the day. So that's the first thing. And if you look at sort of where they spend their time and energy, oftentimes the things that they're spending time and energy on is not the best use of their talents. And so a lot of the work that they're asked to do really is commoditized work. When you think back to the earlier discussion about economies of scale, it's really easy for Microsoft to take on that stuff and do it instead of your IT guys. And by doing that, you really free them up to do things that are higher value for your business. So what we've seen is not people going away. We have seen labor shift to Microsoft. What it's allowed us to do is see the IT people in your organization play a much different role. Instead of them being the ones who are always the reason that things can't get done quick enough, all of a sudden they're actually supporting and enabling your business and able to really be a lot more functional or proactive than they've been in the past.
Thank you. What are the cost savings of moving my ERP to the cloud?
So I was saying earlier, there's different workloads that make a lot of sense to be in the cloud. And those cost savings are dramatic and they are immediate. And the three I think I mentioned were around email, disaster recovery, and file storage. Fourth one would be unified communication. So it's the ability for you to do video, instant messaging, telephone calls, have your phone system be smart enough to know that you're not at the office and bring your cell phone instead. Those kinds of things. When it comes to your ERP, it's probably a little less obvious what those cost savings are. And I say that because often people will compare the cost of a new server to what they're going to pay in the cloud, and they use that as kind of an only comparison. They're not thinking about all the other costs that they have with that server if they were to put it on site. And so if you just do a one-to-one comparison in the cloud, it still often makes economic sense, but it makes a lot more economic sense if you look at all the things you wouldn't have to do if you didn't have that server on site anymore, in terms of taking up office space, in terms of configuring it, in terms of patching it, in terms of putting new software on it to upgrade it, in terms of air conditioning to keep it cool. Once you start comparing those kinds of things from a cost perspective, it no longer makes sense to have them on site. As I mentioned earlier, this idea of it being actually redundant in a way that is far superior than what you could ever perform on site just because of cost. It's not that it's not doable, it just becomes financially not worthwhile. That quality of service and just how much higher level of service that you have with that equipment in the cloud, when you look at the fact that most organizations these days are a lot more remote, so not everybody is at the office. So having that file server or database server in a location that's feet away is interesting for the people that are a few feet away, but as soon as you are 100 miles away or 50 miles away, it becomes a lot less interesting. When you get back to things around security, and allowing access to those assets through the internet, for an organization to be able to do that is very difficult. When you look at, again, I don't know how many of you started your jobs recently, but if you look at a new person coming into an organization, in most organizations, the first thing they want to do is get their smartphone on the network. And the first thing they find out is that that's not going to happen, or maybe they have to have an Android, or they have to have an iPhone, or maybe it's going to take a month. And it's difficult to understand how something could take that long. Again, as an IT guy, it's very hard to secure those devices. It's very hard to keep track of what software is where. And so it's a mammoth pain to be able to manage those devices. Microsoft can do it in 36 seconds. They have the process put in place, whether you have an Android, an iPhone, a BlackBerry, a Windows phone, it just works. And so those kinds of things in terms of enabling your business are very hard to put an actual economic value on, but they're absolutely mammoth or massive if you are a person in that business that's trying to drive sales or drive marketing or drive change or whatever. So it's often not calculated correctly, but if you sit down and calculate it correctly, it would be far less expensive to have your ERP server in the cloud.
Will our clients' ISV solutions work with a cloud-based ERP?
The easy answer is yes. Now, it somewhat depends on which version of cloud you're running. So some SaaS cases, not all ISVs are able to run in the SaaS case. But all ISVs are able to run in the PaaS case or the IaaS case. And so I would say for most people, at least the people we're working with, the answer is yes. There's not very many that would be in a software as a service solution ISVs.
Great. Will I lose control of when updates happen?
You don't lose control when updates happen. Again, if you think about a true software as a service setting, it does sort of lend itself to that idea that things just get updated. So I'm thinking about Office 365 as an example. So you can have Office 365 just update whenever you want. You can stop it from updating and still have control over when you do that. You can have it sort of stop for a while, meaning that you got a month or 2 months or 3 months, and then it's going to update. You can do a number of things with Office 365. When you think about ERP, which I think is probably what you're really asking me, it's no fun to come to work on Monday and find out that you can no longer communicate with your bank, that people are expecting to get paid, and that's not going to happen, right? So in the case of ERP, it is heavily controlled when you're going to do updates, just to make sure that those things that you're doing, that maybe integrations and things, are not going to break and cause you, business continuity issues. So that's very tight and works very well. When you look at maybe an application in between those two things, like Dynamics Sales, Dynamics 365 Sales, what used to be called CRM, it's sort of a mix of the two. So often what happens with that one is it kind of gives you a 3-month window in which to upgrade. and suggest strongly that you do it then. But you have control over when in that 3 months, and if you really wanted to stop it, you can. You can stay one version back.
Right. Before we go into one of our last questions, again, lots of information is coming out to our customers about different products and different offerings that we have. So maybe we can just quickly talk about that Dynamics 365, Office 365, Office. What things are in the cloud for our customers?
So Microsoft's model is such that they believe that everything should be able to be in the cloud or on site, or what they would call a hybrid model, where you could have part on site, part in the cloud. And I've been talking about the public cloud a lot, but this concept of a private cloud as well. So if you wanted to host things with a hoster, that would be a private cloud, or if you had maybe a different data center that was yours, but it was off-site somewhere, that would be a private cloud. And you know, I totally lost my train of thought.
We've got Dynamics 365, which is true SaaS, correct? Right. Software as a service.
Right.
What about our customers? I mean, everyone's using Office, and we also offer Office 365.
So Office 365 is kind of it's really a licensing model. So it's a pay by the month model. Again, you're allowed to run it on-prem only. You're allowed to run it in the cloud only, or some hybrid of that. So
right.
It's the same with Dynamics. That's sort of the model. You're allowed to run part in the cloud or part on site, or all of it on site or all of it in the cloud.
Right. So it's a lot about choice. Like you were talking about today, you've got choices. You started a business 10 years ago, you can still migrate to the cloud. If you're starting a business today, you can start up in the cloud.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. So that leads us to our next question. Where do I start?
Where do I start? I think it's, this is changing a lot. So from week to week, day to day, hour to hour, what was true last week may not be true anymore. It's a good place to consult a partner. We do this for a living. This is all we're doing every day, all day. Whatever business you happen to be in, that's sort of what you do every day, all day, and you kind of just want stuff like this to work. So I think it's important to really think about just how technology plays in your business in a more holistic fashion. So, back to the water heater example, often if we own houses and our water heater breaks, the first thing we do is we buy a new water heater. We don't look at sort of, hey, should I do geothermal? Should I be doing on demand? What should I do? We just want to fix the problem because I want to have a hot shower tomorrow. And I think we're a little bit like that in our businesses as well. I'd suggest strongly that it's a good idea to really have a plan about what you're going to do and how the cloud is going to affect you. And why I believe that is, it's just been my experience that as an organization, you're going to spend $100 a year for the next 5 years on technology, as an example, this hypothetical number. Whether you have a plan or not won't often change the number you're going to spend. You're going to have spent $500 in one case or the other. If you don't have a plan, you're going to wake up 5 years from now and be pretty close to where you are today. And if you do have a plan, you're going to wake up 5 years from now and be pretty close to where you want to be. And so if you look at the pressure that's being put on IT in general, or even finance, because I think the two are related, there's a lot of pressure to do more with less. There's a lot of pressure to allow the business to evolve more quickly and to have technology be the basis of that business evolution. And if you think about sort of where we really spend our time in IT, we're just trying to keep the stuff running that we already have. So the idea of doing new stuff is not a very fun thing to think about, mostly because every time we do something new, it opens us up to the risk of things not working. And we've been taught by many, many meetings over the years that things need to work every day, all day. And so we're averse to that kind of concept. And the best way to not have something break is just to never change it. If you think about this world, instead of those massive updates that are happening every 18 months, as an example, or something like that, there's doing a little bit of updates every week. And so it changes the risk profile a lot. So things are changing, that's fine. Some things will work, some things won't, that's fine. When you do a little over the course of time, the impact is not a challenge to your business continuity. Whereas if you do a lot at once, you have a sort of change or potential for disaster to happen in terms of your business being down for an hour or a day or whatever it might be. So the new world really allows you to do things in a different way. We kind of have to unlearn the stuff we've been doing for the last 30 years because it's exactly counter to how you would use the new tools. Yeah. So In terms of how you get started, I think you got to have a plan, and you got to have a plan that's sort of relative in scale to what you're trying to achieve. So we tend to go at this in 3 different ways. One would be the simple, hot water heater broke, got to do something. We would call that a cloud consult. How do we take a quick and dirty look at what you're doing and try and align that very quickly with what other customers are doing and take advantage of best practices and sort of the things that you can really take advantage of really quickly to get value. That value, as I said, often is in the form of less cost, but other times it's in the ability for you to be able to do things you couldn't do before. The second level is something we call a path forward, which really is looking at what you're trying to do as a business and make sure that your technology plan is aligned with your business plan and that it's going to be supporting it, not inhibiting it, and really work with you to have a really good discussion about how we see that, because you're going to have an idea of what that looks like given your frame of reference, and it'll be pretty good in terms of what you think tech should look like. The difference is the frame of reference that you're using is what you know, and sort of the number of things that you know are more traditional than the things that we're starting to get to know because of our immersion in the cloud. And so I think there's a really good conversation that can happen there that doesn't take an awful lot of time, that really can create a better plan to ensure that you're on the right path. So that would be sort of the medium level. And then the big one we're doing these days is something called the digital transformation, where we're not only looking at how do we align what the IT group is trying to do or what your IT plan is with your business plan, your strategic plan, but we're actually giving you a framework for how to execute against that. Because what you start to see in all of these different endeavors in terms of putting in a new system of some sort, the system's only as good as the people and process around it. And so, if people can't adopt the system, it actually has little or no impact other than just increasing your cost. And so, if you really want people to do things in a different way, you have to show them how to do that. So I'll give you an example about ERP systems, say 10 years ago. I mean, if you think about your common ERP system 10 years ago, first of all, it wasn't really an ERP system. It really was a financial backbone. It didn't really do anything other than financials. And if you think about it, what would happen is that the people that were running that solution would be very small, almost always only the people in your finance group. And because the licenses were very, very expensive, you didn't want to buy any more than you had to. So we shrunk the ability for people to use it. So that was kind of the first issue. The second issue was that people were unable to use that. If you're not an accountant, as an example, it's very hard to use an ERP system. It's hard to be a casual user of an ERP system because it doesn't work in a way that's intuitive to people who are non-accountants. And so, those are 2 pretty big hurdles in terms of adoption of getting into company. It was cost and just usability was too low. If you look at sort of how this stuff works today and how integrated Dynamics 365 is with Office 365 as an example, and how I can actually do purchase orders, I can create invoices and do all these kinds of things from within Outlook. So within Outlook, I can do that kind of stuff. It also makes a whole lot of sense for casual users to be able to come into the system through a tool that they're comfortable with and that they know how to use, and be able to do financial transactions that are still done in a secure, safe way that the CFO and the controller are going to be okay with. But everybody kind of gets a license at the same time that's priced the way that they would expect, so they can afford to be part of the system. And ultimately, you can kind of drive this adoption of that ERP system across the organization to get everybody the information they need when they need it. So that's the dream, if you will. And digital transformation is about helping you to think through. It's a framework around how to not only look at those cost optimization pieces that we talked about earlier. How do I do things cheaper? How do I do it better? How do I do it faster? But how do you look at it in terms of doing it completely different? And how do you make sure that the business users, the ones that are outside of IT and finance, can actually adopt these systems and use them the way they were intended to get the value that you want from your business?
So when we say you've got your head in the clouds, it's a good thing.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Any thoughts on the future of cloud?
I think it's going to keep going, more fast and more furious. I don't know how much looking at things like predictive analytics that any of you have done, but this concept of the data actually telling you things about your business that you didn't know as opposed to you having to ask. If you look at this sort of concept of artificial intelligence or these bots to be able to do things that humans used to do, to be able to again, take some of those commoditized things that all of us have to do with businesses, but make them into something that people don't have to do. There's some really neat work happening there. I think is going to be pretty mainstream in the next year or two, and just more and more mobile. I mean, it's all about people being able to do stuff on their phones, people not being tied to their desks, people being able to have all the benefits of social, meaning that they can work together and be around each other, but in a more virtual way as opposed to in a physical way. And you know, I think all of us kind of laugh about the people we see walking down the street that have their face buried in their phone and aren't noticing anything going on around them. I don't think it has to be that. I don't think it has to be 4 people sitting at a table having dinner and not saying one word to each other, looking at their phones the whole time. But that is actually a thing. I mean, people are pretty engaged in their device, and you know, that's the way that many people want to interact. We have to be able to figure out a way to support that makes sense.
Great. Well, thanks for chatting with us today about cloud, Brent. We really appreciate that. If you're interested in some next steps, we can provide you a complimentary quote for upgrading your ERP into the cloud and receive a free trial migration to the cloud. So if you're interested in that, you can certainly send us off an email. We've got lots of great resources to learn more about the cloud and how it impacts you as a business. And for all of those people attending, you'll be sent out all of that information after the webinar wraps up. And we look forward to attending our next webinar, which will be talking a little bit more about Dynamics 365 and Office 365. As always, thank you so much for attending, and we look forward to hearing from you all soon. Thanks, and thanks, Trevor.
I have a question from the audience.
Great. Sorry, I should ask that.
Tracy Godfrey. If anyone else has any, leave them in the chat or the questions area. I've had a hard time finding online reviews or feedback from companies who have done a full ERP cloud migration. What can be expected in terms of performance and speed for the user experience?
So it depends a little about which platform you're on. So I don't know if you're on Dynamics GP, Dynamics Nav, or Dynamics AX. But basically, if you look at the way the data centers are set up, they're set up, let's assume that you're using the Canadian data centers. They're set up in a way that the latency time between those data centers in Ontario and Quebec, no matter what major city you're in Canada, so let's pick Victoria because that would be the one that's furthest away physically, that you have basically zero latency or near zero latency between those centers. So then really your ability to get decent speed, or performance of the system really is around how do you eliminate the number of hops between you and that hub. And by hops I mean, if you think about it, you know, electrons fly around at the speed of light, so that's pretty fast. So what slows them down is every time it hits a piece of switching equipment, it has to decide where is this going. It's sort of like a way of addressing it to the next place. So as long as you limit the number of hops between you and that hub, you're going to get performance that's pretty much the same as you would expect if it was sitting in the next room. And as I said, what's neat about that is it's not just the people in the head office that get that experience, it's the people sort of across the company, whether they're sitting in their own office or you know, an airport lounge or wherever they happen to be. So that's sort of what I would expect. If you look at the web client in Dynamics GP, it's still, you know, generation 2. It needs to come a little ways before you can just use the web client to be able to do that, but you should be able to use the full-featured desktop to be able to get that kind of performance. Usually what we do in that case is we actually give you a remote or RDP or you know, Citrix server or one of those kinds of connections into the data center, so you can actually get better speed where it's just transferring key clicks and mouse clicks and screen redraws. When you look at a product like Dynamics Nav, as an example, the web client is highly optimized. And so some of the testing that I've done has been with a client in Dubai going against a data center in Northern Europe, then a data center in Southern or Southeast Asia, and then a data center in North America. And the performance was such that you'd be happy using it. It's not perfect, but you'd be happy using it. And why I use that as an example is Dubai actually, although it's probably one of the most opulent cities in the world, their communications infrastructure to the rest of the world is terrible. So if you could use something there, you can pretty much use it anywhere. Again, not satellite communications in places like Yellowknife and Whitehorse, but in any terrestrial-based wide area network application, you should be able to use it and get speeds that you'd be happy with.
Great. Thanks a lot, Brad.
That's a long-winded answer. Huh? Sorry, Tracy.
Another question?
Yeah, hold on.
Okay.
All right, we currently issue SQL queries against our own offsite dynamic SQL server for a number of integrations. Would we be able to query the database in a cloud environment?
Yes. Yeah, you can. And in the nav environment, I mentioned that and this is a little different question because you're talking about integration, but I mentioned that you could, with the web client, sort of go across the wide area network. You can actually do the same thing with the full-featured client. It's not really chatty, and you can actually use it across the wide area network, and it works quite well. In the case of SQL calls, to be able to do integrations, whether that be batch integrations or sort of service, as they happen, real-time integrations, certainly not a problem.
Fantastic. Well, if anyone does have any more questions, they can certainly email us here at Uncur and we'll get back to you. Wishing you all a fantastic afternoon and look forward to seeing you or listening to you and your questions on our next webinar. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.